Testing.
Okay, now I heard it. I guess there was a lag.
Yeah, it's always lagging. I meant like a second, whatever.
Oh, you can hear? I don't even know you could.
Perfect.
7.
I see Junior.
Oh, I was just talking about him. I said I miss him coming today.
Yeah.
Hey, Junior.
Everything's working well. I can hear. Okay.
Okay, I'm posting. Let me make sure I did this correctly. Okay. Okay. I'm just making sure. I'm just making sure that that lag is only on
Yes.
my phone and
Yeah.
not. Okay, perfect. Let me move this here. All right, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're just getting everything situated, sharing the link so everyone can catch on while we're live. Join in the chat, and we'll get started in a minute. No lag here. Thank you, Junior. And everything's working. Perfect.
Okay, that's what we like to hear.
Exactly.
Would you like to open us today? Would you like to do the intro?
Yes.
Okay. Right at 11:30. Let's begin.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, we'll get started right at 11:30. So it is almost time, guys. Let me go to yes right here.
Okay. Talk to the people while we're live.
Oh yeah. Okay, well, it is 11:30. So we're here and we just want to say welcome back to another episode of What Anna
Anna
Said
Said
podcast.
podcast.
It is us three this morning, so we're both working the technical side of things and then also being your host and co-host today. We are here at Dos Amores, located in Hurst, Texas. And yes, we're just going to turn down the phone real quick. We're
Okay.
also watching the live on the phone just to make sure that it doesn't cut out like it did last week. Okay. But thank you guys for tuning in. Wherever you guys are at, whether you're at work tuning in or you're on your morning walk with your family watching from the living room.
Let us know.
Yeah, wherever it is, let us know in the comments down below where you guys are tuning in from. And yeah, if you've been joining us this far, you know that we've been diving into a book called Formed Underwater: Four Truths That Shape Identity, Purpose, and Destiny. And last week we started diving into chapter 1, a little bit about that. So we're going to go ahead and just get right into it.
Right. Yes.
And like Kim said, hello to everybody. It's a beautiful Friday here. As you know, when it's 11:30 on a Friday, we're here. We're going live at Dos Amores. Thank you so much to Dos Amores for opening the doors to us and just allowing us to have this space to be able to hang out with each other and just talk about this book and walk alongside each other. Thank you so much to Dele. Every time we come in here, he's ready with the sweet tea. He's ready with the coffee. So thank you so much to the staff here at Dos Amores for taking such good care of us every single morning when we walk in here. If you've been following along with us, or even if you've gotten your book recently so that you can join us, please, we are going to be starting off on page 18 today. We will, for those of you who may have not, we're going to talk a little bit about what we previously talked about, and then we'll walk through everything we're going through. Like Kim said, this book, Formed Underwater, it is about four foundational truths that shape identity, purpose, and destiny. This book walks us through a lot of uncomfortable questions, a lot of hard truths, a lot of direction, and it tells us your starting point, and it helps us right from the beginning, right from the nothingness. Okay, we're going to take it all the way back today. And this is an exciting time for us because we are learning as we're going, and we really sit here as students ourselves to this material, and we're walking through together. And so because we're students and we're learning from each other, we also want to learn from you. So if you are walking through this and whatever it is that you want to share, that you want to add to what we're speaking about, please share it in the comments and share your story, share your experience. this is exactly what we're here for, and that's what this platform has been built to do, is to just get to know that with one another and walk through this together. So like I said, we're jumping out into page 18 here. Last week we began chapter 1 and we started talking about identity. Okay, identity. What is that? What is identity? When someone asks you, or somebody's getting to know you, what are some of the questions that you ask to try to get to know somebody? Sometimes it's, what do you do for work? Where do you work? If you are in the Pacific Islander community, what church do you go to? Or things like that. And so we're gonna dive more into that today. And before we go on to page 18, I'm just gonna go ahead and give the floor to Edner. And Edna has done such a great job. Every single week we get together, she takes us through what we've already pieced together and the things we're learning, and then we're gonna go from there. So thank you so much, Edna, for doing that for us. Every time we get together, Kim and I, our brains are a little bit scrambled, but you help put that back together. So I'm gonna let you take the floor.
Add me into that, okay? And also, as for myself to you, thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, so join me right now as I take you on a recap of what we learned last Friday. So, like Anna said, we are on chapter 1, so you did not miss a thing yet, okay? And as Kim and I like to say, we both like to write our thoughts down and take notes. So, for all you note takers, please grab your pencil and paper from what you left off from last time and just continue that on, because just like Anna said, we're on this journey together. We're all students here learning off of one another.
Yeah.
All right, so chapter 1, identity. Identity. Who are you? The author says, before you even decide where you're going, you must first know who you are. And the author, for many years, he had believed that identity was something that you have to prove. So he studied hard, he served faithfully, sacrificed quietly, and stayed obedient. And for his identity, he thought, doing all these things, eventually my results will reveal itself. And he thought becoming someone was a destination I would arrive at once I had done enough to deserve it. But he discovered that identity doesn't work that way. We discovered from last Friday that identity is not discovered at the finish line, but at the starting point. And so, as we begin the starting point, we will also like to share some of ours as we continue on this chapter. But what we have learned that is very crucial to learn is that when a person doesn't know who they are, they borrow definitions from everywhere else: culture, success, titles, expectations. Last week, we got to touch a little bit about family pressure, especially within our culture, and also religion. One of the biggest questions that we got to talk about was, who am I? Who am I apart from what I do for others? And so this question matters so much more than what you would think, because when identity is unclear, life is exhausting. You keep moving, but you don't feel anchored. You stay busy, but you're not fulfilled. You remain faithful, but quietly frustrated. So these sounds like amazing things, and I'm sure your brains are all going off right now thinking about what identity is, because that's such a, I think, a scary top question, like you said earlier. When someone says, "Oh, what do you do?" or "Who are you?" Things like that, we kind of stumble, and you want to give the best answer first instead of thinking, again, instead of like, wait, with the thoughts of, wait, who am I? Why does this question offend me all of a sudden, right? And so join us along as we continue on to chapter 1, identity. Who are you?
Thank you so much for setting that up, Ender. That's completely true. And getting into this book, it's like, okay, stop asking me that. Okay, I'm figuring it out right now. I'm at the starting point. And I think that's something that we talked about last time that could be scary, is that you could live your life and get to where you are today and say, what? I'm not even at the starting point. So you're telling me that identity is where we are starting off of before we could do anything else. We need to first understand who we are. And every time we keep saying, who am I, who am I, there's this movie that we used to watch as kids, and I completely forgot the name of the movie, but all I know is a Jackie Chan movie. And there's a part in the movie where I think something happens where he loses his memory. Okay, somehow he has amnesia, he loses his memory, and there's a scene where he's on top of the roof. I haven't seen it in the last 10 years, so I'm just trying I'm trying to remember. I think there's a scene where he's on top of the roof and he's literally yelling because he's frustrated. He's been spending this after his memory's lost, he's spending time trying to figure out who is he, who am I, what is my identity. So he's at the top of the roof, he's at the end of his, patience, he's had it, and he's yelling, who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I? And I remember as a kid, I was like, who am I? What does that mean? And my dad's like, he's saying, who am I? Who am I?
Yeah.
Because of his accent in the movie. It's like, who am I? Who am I? And so every time I'm reading this, I'm like, who am I? Who am I? Like, Jackie Chan was right. We need to take it back there. Who am I? Okay.
Yes.
And so as I read this, I'm like, yeah, who am I? Who am I? And so let's get right into it,
Yes.
because this is these are definitely things that I'm sure all of it, like we said, a lot of these things come up in our life, and whether we say it out loud or not, these at one point in time in your life, these are the things that you're going to be face to face with, and you're going to be asking yourself that same question, who am I? Okay. And so, and thank you so much to those that are
Yes.
joining us live right now. We just want to say hello
Yes.
to Malene, Salah, and also
you.
to Junior 3598. Thank you
And
so much
Well
for letting us know we're good
Adventures.
to go on our live. And Wells Adventures, thank you for tuning in from Bedford. If you know, Hearst is right next to Bedford, and so the restaurant here is right here down the street. So for anyone who's wondering, that's where we are, Dos Amores in Hearst. But let's go ahead and jump right
Yes.
into page 18, and we begin here with the first paragraph here. Kim, can you please read that for us?
Yes.
I began to understand that identity is not something God withholds until we perform well. Identity is something He establishes before we ever act, long before achievement, long before failure, long before approval or rejection. That part right there, okay, just read it again. That, the author here talks about how he began to understand that identity wasn't something that, God keeps from us, or it comes from establishing or making a name for yourself. It's long before all of those things, like Anna and Edner mentioned, that the identity is the starting point, not the end point, because of the results of what you do in life.
Yes, Edna touched on this when she shared in the beginning, when you were walking us through what we've already discussed here, and you were saying how the author, in his frustration about everything that he'd been doing faithfully, all the work he'd been doing, showing up for his family, showing up for his church, his community, and in all those things, being frustrated by it, and not and thinking that, oh, at the end of all of this, and at the end of my efforts, it will be revealed to me who I am. It will show, get my identity will be known, as if it's a reward for the effort that he was doing. But we see here that the author, when he begins to understand. So for those of you who have not been walking with us through this, we spent a lot of time, the previous episodes when we started this book, a lot of time discussing the frustrations, discussing the disappointments, discussing the hard uh confrontations that the author had within his own self, starting out something, thinking that it was the right thing, hitting a wall, moving his entire family for something he believed, and then realizing, like, oh no, I made this big move, I made a change that I can't undo, and I'm stuck because the thing that I thought I was pursuing is not happening. And so we've seen all these struggles, this internal struggle happening from all these pages, and then now we're here, and the author says, I began to understand that identity is not something that God withheld. He didn't withhold this from me this entire time. He wasn't waiting for me to perform well, to do my job, to go to seminary, to do this. God wasn't waiting for that to give me this identity. No. Identity is something that He established before I ever did, before I ever tried, before I ever even thought, even had the question of who I am. It was something that God already established before that, before achievement, even before failure. Even before failure, God had already gave me my identity. He already created that within me. And before approval or rejection. And I love, love, love that. As somebody who as somebody, as a people pleaser, when if you're looking for validation, you're looking for approval, you're basing your next step based on the way that it's being received, and you're 100% of the time you're being perceived by people outside of you, and so sometimes you try to take control of the way that people perceive you so that you can control the way that they're viewing your identity, the way they identify you. But I love that the author's saying here, long before failure and long before approval, long before rejection, identity is something established before all of that.
Yes. Thank you, Anna, for breaking that down because as you're speaking, it's definitely rewinding moments throughout my life of when did that starting point begin for me? And so thinking about that, for me, it began way back into my childhood. But first, just to touch on asking yourself, who am I? First, the thought is that knowing that I was created, knowing that there was a creator,
Let's start there.
that there was a
Right,
maker.
right.
And that's why it pulls on, that's why Jackie Chan was on the roof. And who
Who am
am I?
I?
Because he's like,
Who am I?
a creator made me to do something. What is that? What am I here for? As we talked about in previous uh, podcast, is that internally we know that there's something that we're supposed to do. So for me, that was back in my childhood. In my childhood, I come from a background of childhood abuse, as I've spoken about previously as well. So looking, I literally went through a identity crisis, is what I felt like looking back, because growing up in childhood abuse, and for me, I was someone who was always looking and searching. Something kind of made me laugh because I remembered a memory, a friend of ours at church one day. She came up to me. She was like, "Enner, you stare a lot." And I knew I did, but I
Thank
didn't
you.
know I didn't know that I was being watched. But I remember kind of like felt like, okay, now I can't stare too much. But because of my childhood abuse and having that background going on, I really wanted to see what other people were doing. I was really intrigued with how people were moving because I was trying to find happiness. And so therefore with my identity crisis, especially going into the teenage years, I was definitely borrowing identity from people. I was. I am a girl who loves art, a girl who loves to write, a girl into poetry, books, all those things. But my friends that I grew up with, they were all those who were playing in sports. And so, because that's what they were doing to me, that was cooler, that was better. So I would always try to imitate them, try to copy, try to borrow their identity, not realizing that that's what I was doing because I was trying to figure out who am I? Of course, down the line in my years of finding God and becoming a mother and a wife, I just thought, you know what, maybe this is it. I'm a mother, I'm a wife. God has brought me through so much. I'm so thankful for it. But I literally thought that my mission now is just raising my children and being a good wife. Now, don't get me wrong, those are great things. Those are a blessing. As we always say, our families, our children, our partners, these are our first mission. Our first mission. But in the midst of teaching my boys, is what I love about the order, how God reordered things, is that I began to ask my oldest son, when I would say, "What do you want to do? Or what do you want to be?" When I tell you that is a topic that literally we almost want to strangle each other because he's like, "Mom, I don't know what I want. I don't know, Mom. I don't know, Mom." And then later on, I'm like, "What do I want to do? What do I want to be?" I'm over here trying to teach him something. Do I know who I am? And so I had to apologize and take it even further back. What do you like to do? What is the things that like you think about, you dream about, that you wish? Go big. What are those big dreams? So I started there, and then like I said earlier, having to start back with God created you, son. God made you for a purpose. What is that? Let's figure that out together. So I definitely learned as a mother how to change my tone to help him, something that I was also navigating for myself. But during the years of being a mother and a wife, I discovered something which was my starting point. I remembered at the Arthur a couple pages back, he talks about how he met God in a very undeniable way. He cannot deny God whatsoever. And that's why we know that's, again, the birth of the book came from someone who was like, I need to know who I am. And so, with that being said, I remember how I met God in the most undeniable way, and I thought about all the things that God had brought me through the child abuse, through the suicide, through the depression, and now I'm sitting here happy with my family. I think, "No, there has got to be more to my story than just this." And then that's when we start having our fellowship with one another. And then, as I said before, Anna would come and say, "Who are you? What's your purpose?" And yes, and then not knowing that the start had already been the pot had already been stirred for me, and then having to answer that, because eventually I think the scary part is having to actually answer back to that question. And so that's when I thought, oh, now I was like, thank you God that there is a purpose more than just claiming I'm a mother
Yeah.
and a wife, right? That my pain did not was not meant for anything. My pain became its purpose. That when he talks about long before failure, I look back in my life and I always labeled it as a childhood going through navigating all these hard things, that was a failed part of my story. That there was nothing. It was just a sad. It's a very sad story, but at the same time, knowing God and what He was showing me was like, no, the failure was your preparation. It was for your learning. Your God was mending my heart, was posturing my heart all these years to be able to posture my heart to tend to other families, to tend to other people who's gone through my situation, to share my story. Therefore, as we were meet up for fellowship, I was like, oh, this is who I am. I'm someone who speaks to help other people be set free from what they are going through. And so, again, this is our journey. So, it's such a beautiful thing that we're all going through together.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Edna. And sorry, Kim, I saw that you had something you wanted to say.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing that, Edner. And just like you said, Edner, is so true because, as we grow up, especially as young kids, and even now as adults, a lot of the times, whether we realize it or not, what other people we take a lot of consideration in what other people think of us, and what other people perceive about us, and a lot of the times when you were mentioning that, I was just thinking back on my life too, that all those times that I'm worried about what this person thinks of me or what this group, has to say about me. And I'm over here, dragging my feet like, no, that's not who I am. But like Jackie Chan, like Anna said, like, who am I? And then how you said when Anna came and she was asking that question to us, like, no, who are you? Like, who are you? And then you start getting frustrated because when I think of it, I was getting frustrated because I'm like, well, I don't know who I am then. Because I told you I do this, I do this, I do this, and you keep telling me that's not who you are, then what am I supposed to say? I have nothing left to say. And that's the moment where the transformation is starting to, the clocks are starting to turn a little bit, because then now you're really sitting and having to ask yourself that question. And now you really have to peel back those layers. And it's not what you do for other people, but it's truly who has always been inside of you. Like you said, Enter, that yearning, like there has to be more. And it goes back to that song, like Anna said, there's got to be more to life. But literally, there's got to be more because you were created by the Creator Himself, that there's so much purpose and intentionally formed and created and designed. And I just think that it's once you get to that point and once you realize who you truly are, the perception of what other people think or say about you, it truly like an arrow's coming to you and it just bounced right off. It's like because now you know where you're going, your starting point, and now it's just full on speed ahead.
Yes, a lot of looking at this and even well, let me go back and address what you just said. Sorry, I don't want to move past that. But everything that you just shared about how we would have those conversations about who are you, and you would say, "I'm a mom. I'm this. I'm this." Like, no, who are you? And then and it gets frustrating, and having those frustration. Well, okay, I don't know. Why don't you tell me who I am since that's not the right answer? But just those frustrations that built up, and like you said, and then that break, is where the beginning of the real questions and the kind of the direction like that it was guiding you towards asking the questions that this book actually asked, that this book has the questions that give you direction into discovering that. And but that just reminds me, just like how Edna was sharing about our families, our children, and being a wife, how beautiful of that to be our ministry as wives, as mothers. But like you said, but that's not who I am. That's not, yes, this is what I do, this, but not who I am. And you were just sharing how you had to come to a place too, that break and kind of before you could start asking the right questions that led you to where we are today. And it just reminds me of this, when I was reading this the first time, one of the things that came to my mind was Ronda Rousey. And I know you guys are like, Ronda Rousey, what does that have to do with anything we're talking about? But Ronda Rousey, she made the UFC for women popular. She's the one who like really put women in UFC on the map. And so I remember just kind of falling in love with her, like as I thought she was like so cool and like okay, like I'm such a like yes, this girl's kicking butt, like you go girl. And so anyway, I remember watching her match against I think it's Holly Holm. And like, please somebody correct me. Okay. Like if you're in the comments right now, give me just feed me the details because I'm going off of my memory here. But I remember watching that fight, and it was actually her first loss. And so this is someone who's been undefeated. This is someone who's had like such a good run. She's at the height, of her career. She's getting movie deals. Like she's a household name. Everybody knows, who she is. And I remember that first loss, and I remember watching it. And as it was unfolding, the match was unfolding. I remember I couldn't believe it. I remember watching it like, there's no way. There's no way. Like this is Ronda Rousey. Show her who you are. Like there's no way that you're losing right now. But anyway, so after the match, I just remember watching her just in disbelief. Like the way that I thought I was in disbelief watching this, but just seeing her completely crumble, just seeing her completely like have to sit with that she lost. She lost this match. She was a warrior, she was a champion, and then she lost. And then there were, the interviews and stuff that came out after she had lost that match, and everyone's asking her, "How do you feel? What's next? What are you gonna do? You're gonna rematch? All this kind of stuff." And there was one particular interview, and I completely forgot which interview it was, but I remember Rhonda breaking down. I remember the interviewer was talking to her and she completely lost it and she was in tears. I mean, this was like, I'm sure when she came there that day to do the interview, she didn't expect to break down in the middle of this interview and it's being recorded. But in that moment, I saw the identity collapse. The identity collapse that we talked about a few pages before this, where it was like, what's going on? This is who I am. And I remember her saying, if I can't be a fighter, then what am I? What else can I be? And I remember her crying and saying that if not for this, then what else? Like there's nothing left for me. And just watching that unfold in real time on TV and just thinking like, to me, I was like, you're still a warrior, you're still a champion, you're still that girl. Like this doesn't disqualify you from everything that you've already done. It doesn't take away everything that you've done. But that's the thing, is that identity has nothing to do with what we're doing. It has nothing to do with that. And so, but just reading this and just like you shared about that moment where that break happened, where you pushed to that point where it was like, wait, who am I? When everything's stripped away, when these things are taken away from me, who am I? Who am I left with? Who am I? So
As you're talking, something's like being revealed to me that I think sometimes it's the thing that stops us from wanting to push forward is that what if I do fail? And I hate that that's her story because she probably believed that she felt in front of an entire nation. And then you're having people come up to you in your face. And even though we may not go through a situation like that, but that's how it feels like when we do fail. What if someone sees this, or what if that's all I knew how to do it. And so that's one of the things that I struggled with in doing my life and my testimony was, God, you're gonna have to show me the next thing because I don't know. I think you called me for teaching. One of the things that Kim was talking about, like, well, let's say for example, a teacher, and we know you're a teacher, but if you don't know it, we can't force that upon you. The tone, your attitude towards your calling, right? And so one of the things that we're teaching with our little champs in our home, sorry, I just brought it up. No, me can't piece it up. But one of the things that we teach them is their little champs, our homeschool community, our little champs, we teach them a chant. And so in the beginning, it says, I am a champion, I'm a winner, I'm a leader, right? And then I'm a superhero. But if they're like, I'm a champion, but we know, get pumped up. I am a champion. I am a winner, right? So I know in the beginning, and I'm so proud of just seeing Kim today because I know in the beginning, it was like, yeah, I'm able to do this. And then one day you came. I'm not sure if you knew that was a starting point. Like, I'm supposed to be a teacher. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what your sisters were saying anyways. I didn't know. But when the realization hit you, I love to see. I thought it was nice to see someone have that realization and come up to par. But again, what if, like, God, where do I go from here? Okay, you told me to go to do this. I'm gonna do it, but what? But I remember one of the things you said last week that stuck with me, even after we left, was the how. Like, forget about the how. That's God's part. That's God. That God's in that. Do not worry about the how. When I first came to God, and again reading my Bible, I always began right back in Genesis. Kept going right back to Genesis. Let me start again. Let me do it right because I was very, very robotic with my relationship with him at the beginning. So I would start reading from Genesis, and one of the chapters that I kept stumbling on that frustrated me was when we met the man Abraham in Genesis 12, where God told him to go. God told Abraham, now the Lord has said to, Genesis 12, starting at just 1. It says, now the Lord has said to Abraham, get out of your country, get out, from your family and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. And I struggled with that because, like I shared earlier, as a childhood, I struggled with just my identity, who am I, and then trying to let go of my past self. Because even though you moved on, there's people out there who's going to remind you where you came from. And that used to bother me so much because I wanted not so much show them that I changed, but I wanted them to know that God is real, that God did this for me. I don't worry about my identity. I've left that part of me gone, But again, like just like you said with the fighter, it was a public thing that really like she broke down, and I'm so thankful to because that is real life. And so anyhow, when I kept coming back to this verse, I used to struggle with that in that season because I thought, God, how easy it is. Like you told Abram to go. Because in verse 4, so Abram departed after God told him his blessings and what God was going to do for him. On verse 4, after God was done talking to him, so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him. I love that, which brings me back. In order to move, you have to move first in faith, knowing the believing before the seeing, right? And so it was us with us, but as we were doing a fellowship, and one of the Bible study guide that we were doing brought up Abraham in this passage, and I remember as I was teaching it, I thought, this is not funny, God, because you know how I feel about this verse. Because I did not understand it yet. And I still years later it came back and I said, okay, let me research here. And then I ended up realizing, and it's something that Ken reminded me even time to time, when you go, God will show. And it's something that that changed my life, and I saw that because of how much I struggled with this verse, the struggling to just move forward, the struggling of God, as I walk into who I am becoming, help me take all the thoughts, the negative thoughts I have about others perceive me as, just the was it the provision to going further, show me where I'm going. But I just love that. God saying, don't stop even talking, just go, and I will show you where to go. And so I just wanted to bring that up, and that was one of the things that changed my life. That was one of the verses that was a starting point to continue to keep moving forward.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Ender, for sharing that. Like you said, go and he will
will
show.
show.
Don't worry about the how. Okay, the how will get there. And that's why it's so important to know your identity. Because here in our next part of our book, it talks about, it says, identity answers the questions that success never can. And it goes right back to Ronda Rousey, how she must have felt. It says, am I valuable even if I fail? Am I significant even if no one applauds? Am I still called even when my plans fall apart? And just, that was a perfect capture, Anna, like you said, how you've noticed that part with that interview of, here's a champion. Everyone knows she's a champion. She's never failed. She's on, the best of the best out of all the other, all the other champions there. She is number one. And then when that number one gets taken down and you feel like there's nothing left, then that's when these questions come. Am I valuable even if I fail? Am I? Does it matter? Do you guys even care about me anymore? I failed at this. Do you?
No.
Anna said no. Thank you. But am I significant even if no one applauds? Am I still called even when my plans fall apart? And that is so true because now, back then, right before I knew this truth that I know now, back then looking at my life, and and these questions were to come and I'm to answer these questions, I honestly wouldn't even know how to answer, because at the same time I would say yes, I'm valuable even if I fail, but at the same time here I am taking the perception of what other people think of me and then taking that as my identity, because when you don't know who you are, you copy everyone else or you take what everyone else labels you as. Am I significant even if no one applauds? No, now I'm feeling sorry for myself. Now I don't know, like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna give up. Am I still called even when my plans fall apart? Back then I wouldn't really know how to answer that question. But today, right beside each one of those questions, I said yes. Am I valuable even if I fail? Yes. Am I significant even if no one applauds? Yes. Am I still called even when my plans fall apart? Yes. Okay, now I can speak confidently about these things because now I know who I am. I know my starting point and I am becoming. I am not behind, like Anna likes to say.
When I was reading this, I had to come back to it, but I did kind of did like a overview, and I said this is the part where it's asking me this question, the being foreign part. And so, just like you, Kim, I had my own answers. After I saw it, I thought too hard about it, and I came back to it angrily because I'm like, I know you better stand. I know what you know. So when it says, "Am I valuable even if I fail?" Yes, because when you fail, that's a learning ground. You are adding up experiences of what not to do, what to grow from, what to teach others. Am I significant even if no one applauds? Yes, that is your secret place. And above all, your secret place is where you are growing. Am I still called even when my plans fall apart? If you notice, when my plans fall, yes, because thank goodness that my plan is not God's plan. So thank you, God, that you have a better plan. But yeah, being formed um, into who you were created to be by your maker. I just that's what my answers were as I was reading those.
And thank you guys for taking the time to share your answers too. For those of you who don't have the book, there are certain places in the book where you pause. The author leaves space there so that you can pause for reflection. You can pause so that you can kind of let these questions sit with you and take the time to really reflect, come back to them from time to time, to think about how you're answering, to think about, are you confident in the thing that you're answering. um, so those questions that they're reading here is, there's a couple bullet points here, and it says, am I valuable even if I fail? So if I don't make it, if I don't pass the test, if I don't win the race or win the match, am I still valuable? You know, and like Kim said, the answer is yes. Kim said, yeah, and I said yes. And so, and it says, am I significant even if no one applauds? So if I'm doing this thing and nobody's clapping their hands, if I post a picture on Instagram and nobody likes it, if I share a reel or something that's close to my heart and nobody cares enough to comment, share it, like it, is this significant? Is this information important? Even if no one's applauding, nobody's validating, is this thing still important? Am I still significant? The next bullet point says, am I still called? Even when my plans fall apart, am I still called? Even if the way that I go about making this happen does not work out, does that disqualify me from my calling? Am I still called? Am I still valuable? Am I still significant? And if you have the book, you'll see that there are 4 bullet points. The first 3 I read to you, and there's one more there that's empty. And that is actually for you as the reader to add your own questions there, because we already have it within us.
Mhm.
Am I still, like, if nobody likes me, am I still, there's a lot of, am I a good person? Am I, whatever it is, whatever question it is that you have, that you are struggling with, that you quietly ask yourself, that space is for you to fill that in, and for you to add that, because all of those things that you can ask yourself do not add or take away from who you are, do not add or take away from your identity. And that's because identity is not God's response to our performance. That's something that we're seeing over and over being emphasized as we read through these pages, and we're only in the beginning of chapter 1, is that this is not something that comes to you as a result or a response. No, this is something that is on its own, that is and was already on its own. It's the foundation that from that foundation, everything else in our life comes from. And we see time and time again in scripture where God names identity before assignment, before he gives that calling, before he even gives you a task or anything. He tells you who you are. And there's a lot of times in scripture where we see that. Earlier, Ednard shared about Abraham. And for those of you who don't know the story of Abraham, back before God, when his name was still Abram, his name was still Abram, and God called him Abraham and changed his name to Abraham, calling him the father of many nations. The funny thing about that is that Abraham didn't even have a child when God had called him, when God spoke to him as who he was created to be, when God spoke to his identity. Abraham didn't even have a kid. So imagine walking around without a
Yeah.
child, and God called you. You will be called Abraham, the father of many nations. I'm not even the
Like,
father of one
okay.
child, but you call me the father of many nations. I will walk in that. And there's so many times where God does this. We see that in Jeremiah. In Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, God speaks, and he says, before I formed you in my womb, I knew you before you were born. I knew you before you were born, before you existed, before you were even a thought. I knew you. I set you apart you as a prophet to the nations. And here, God is establishing identity once again, and we see God talking to Jeremiah. This is before Jeremiah stepped into that role. This is way before Jeremiah even knew that he was gonna be Mr. Jeremiah. God already established that, and he said, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. And there's so many times we see this in scripture over and over again. We talked about David. So we talk about David a lot on this podcast, and we talk about how David, this shepherd boy, okay, the youngest of his brothers, a shepherd boy tending to the sheep. David, go out there. We're gonna go and do all the cool stuff. I need you to go watch the sheep. Okay, but even then, God appointed him and called him and identified him as king. But we also see Gideon, the mighty warrior, and my earring just fell off, and that's perfect. But we see Gideon, and an angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, and this was in the time where Israel was really being oppressed by the Midianites. And Israel, they were killing their crops, killing everything, that they had to go and hide in caves and scurry away and not be seen because they were afraid of whatever would happen to them, because they were being oppressed at this time. And Gideon, an angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and even addressed Gideon and said, long before Gideon did anything, he addressed Gideon and said, mighty man of valor. He told him, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Gideon's like,
Okay.
I'm pulling the weeds right now. I'm taking care of the wheat in the field right now. But he was addressed by the angel of the Lord by mighty man of valor. And you can find that story in Judges chapter 6. And even in this, even Gideon's response, Gideon said, how can I save Israel? You don't see me right now? And he said, don't you know that our clan is the weakest in Manasseh? Out of all the clans here, you chose the weakest. And not just that, but I am the least in my father's house. That's from Gideon's own mouth. That's him telling you, oh, no, 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 no. That's not who I am. Let me tell you who I am. I'm the least in my father's house. We're from the weakest clan. But you're calling me mighty man of valor before I even do anything worth that title. And that's the thing, is that before you even do, God calls you. God identifies you. He calls to your identity. He already established that before Abraham had a child, before Jeremiah took that role as a prophet to the nations, before Gideon even thought about leading an army to defeat anybody. All of these times and many more times does God show us through his word in scripture the many times that he has already he's speaking to us as who he created us to be, not as who you are in this time being, who you were in your past, but who you are in it, not who you are in this time being, not in your past, but who you are, who you always have been, who you always were created to be. So I think that that's just so encouraging when I take a look at this, and the author emphasizes how he is we this was established before we act. I think about that, and I just take so much hope and confidence in that, and in knowing that this was established before I even act, before I open my eyeballs. Okay, before I even open my eyes, this thing here was established.
That is so. That just makes me like want to praise as you were talking. I'm like, yeah, keep it going, Anna, keep it going. One of the things that are coming to my turning as you were speaking, Anna, is like how were they able to continue on doing these things? Like you said, Abraham being able to move forward, and God saying, as I read earlier in Genesis 12, as God was speaking to Abraham and he was telling him to go. In verse 2 and 3, God was pouring out his promises to him. He said,
Yes.
Abraham, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Again, you said this. Well, first of all, this is God's promises to Abraham. So he's like, I'm going now.
Right.
But what caused him to just move like that? It was his faith, and I love that his faith allowed them, all of them, to see something, not in the natural light, but to see the ability to see what God has finished, even while standing in what feels so, in the moment, it just feels incomplete. And I just love that this kind of scene, it's not an imagination. We're not making up this thing. Like when we're talking to each other, we're always like dream big because we know that we serve a big God. On the way here, actually, Kim was telling me some big dreams on the way here. She's like, God is aligning these things. But it's so, I'm like, yeah, dream big, Kim. That just hypes my spirit up because we encourage that, because again, we know that God is able to do all these things. And it's not this kind of scene, it's not optimistic. But it is a conviction anchored in the character of the one who promised it, right? And so that is it. Faith is the sense, in the sense, becomes the ability to perceive the finished work of God while still standing in the unfinished work of just life. And so I love the faith, and I love the, like, even us talking about who we are, we're claiming things that we're not even seeing yet,
Right.
but we're seeing it in the spiritual and understanding that God, our faith is going to move this thing because we're anchored to a God who's big and who can do mighty things. Nothing is impossible to this our maker, who has allowed us to say, hey, like you said, before I knew you, before you were born, I knew you. And so this is hypes me up because we are able to think big, to dream big, and again, just walking together in the journey of the who we are is literally a journey we're walking into with, and dreaming big without seeing it yet.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that that's one of the really like just so amazing, so cool things, like you mentioned, Edner, like all of these promises that are literally meant for you, because God created us for his namesake. We are created to be an image of him, to be in his likeness. And knowing that there's more to this life, guys. There is so much more. Then it just starts becoming exciting once you know, who am I? Who are you? Once you can answer that question and you start becoming exactly what God intended you to become, the possibilities are endless. Everything starts becoming fun. The work becomes fulfilling, and it's just go 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 from then on.
Sorry. Uh, Thank you for sharing that, Edner, and Kim too. Thank you guys for just sharing. Like I always say every time, for sharing your experience and being vulnerable and sharing your journeys as we walk along this book, because that's exactly what we want our audience to feel as we walk along, to see yourself in these pages. Where is it in your journey that you are right now? Are these some things that you're starting to realize, or maybe you're at your starting to discover them and you're at your starting point too? And I want to encourage you that we also are. These are things that we're learning together. We're walking through them together, like I said many times, and we're students and witnesses to the process as these truths unfold in our lives. And so um, these questions here are questions that we need to first settle, and that's what the author tells us here. The questions that we just read: Am I valuable even if I fail? Am I significant even if no one applauds? Am I still called even when my plans fall apart? And until those questions are settled, no amount of progress will feel secure. For a long time, and I'm reading here what the author has written, for a long time, I confused calling with identity. I thought my purpose defined who I was, but purpose flows from identity, not the other way around. When identity is misplaced, even good callings become heavy burdens. And that right there is a truth that a lot of us, something that I want to point out here is that being a believer doesn't make you immune to these things here. Being a believer doesn't mean that you're not going to face questions of identity, and face the uncertainty when it comes to that. And so Even when identity is misplaced, good callings can become heavy burdens because yes, these are good things, but was this the right thing that you were created to do? With the way that you were created and the problem solving skills and the gifts that you were given to solve something specific, are you operating in a way that aligns with that purpose when you were created? Or are you doing all these good things, never really fully activating and unlocking the purpose that you were created to be? And so even though you may be doing these good things, they can become heavy burdens because without identity, like we say, identity is the starting point. So without knowing your identity, you haven't even begun to taste the goodness and to taste the to taste the being fulfilled, yes, in what it is that you are doing.
In the beginning, as we were talking about who you are, one of the things I would love for you guys to do as you are going through the questions, um, when I figured out all the things that I was supposed to become, I remember the first thing I did when I got home. You guys remember I said I've been home crying when I
Mhm.
when
I remember.
I found out. I was like, what have I been doing all these years? I remember we were just talking about get one of the nights we got together, and then the question came up, "Who are you?" And I said those things, and then it was like, "But what are you doing to do those things?" And I sat there like, "I'm not doing anything to pursue those things." So on my way home that night, I remember thinking, what am I doing? If I say that this is who I am, what am I then why haven't I done those things? Of course, looking back, there was a lot of fear in it. But when I got home, I remember writing everything down, all the things that I'm supposed to be doing to pursue the things on my purpose. And then on the other side of the paper, I wrote down everything that I was doing. That was a long list. And one of the things that you guys told me was take away the good things that are taking up your schedule. Because when I look back, when I looked at my schedule, there wasn't anything bad that I was doing. It was a lot of serving.
Yes.
It was a lot of assisting teachers.
Yeah.
It was a lot of again filling spots in the ministry, but
Mhm.
it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing
Mhm.
at that moment.
Yeah.
And then when you have that starting point, it
Mhm.
really does feel like a starting point.
Yes.
When the
Yes.
author says, I want, I've like when he talks about
Yeah.
getting to the point where like I realized,
Mhm.
like he said, I realized the four truth that changed my life forever.
Yeah.
It was that moment for me when I sat there and
Yeah.
but it helped me. It helped me
Yes.
navigate my schedule. It helped me pull away without feeling sad
Mhm.
or like I know
Yeah.
we talked about pleasing a lot of people. It
Yeah.
made me like we talked about last time, when I'm able to step down, that then helps somebody else step up into that role.
Yes.
And so I
Exactly.
had a lot of relearning to do.
Mhm.
And so in that moment, again, just being able to know what I need to take away, to
Mhm.
focus on the things that I'm supposed to do
Yeah.
that aligns with who I am, that was the most, like you said, the most fulfilling moment that
Yeah.
I sat there. I'm like, this, like, why did I not think about this before?
Mhm.
Which again is not asking the right questions.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And like you mentioned, you know, I just go back right here where it says, for a long time I confused calling
Mhm.
with identity. And we see that, you know, like you mentioned, and like all these good things on my list, and I'm doing this and this, and it's what you believe, you know, because you're confusing your calling with your identity. And
Mhm.
we learned that about the author, how he mentioned earlier, you know, got married, has 2 kids in America, Samoa, moves to Fiji because he believes this is his calling. Goes to a Bible seminar out there in Fiji, has 2 more kids, and then they make their way to America just to see that the dreamer stopped dreaming. The provider came, you know, a man that has to pay bills, and this whole time he's chasing what he believes is his calling. And I know a lot of us at a lot of the times, you know, whether we realize it or not, we are chasing a calling that is not who we are. It's not who, when God created you and formed you, it's not the plan that God had set inside of you. Maybe it goes along with who you are, but it's not your purpose. It's not what you're supposed to do or go after, you know? And just like you said, Enner, like when you're doing all those good things and you had to look and take a step back, take a step back and step away from those things so that someone else can come and fulfill those roles, because maybe that's for someone else. Because now, you know, like you said, when that part starts to get clear after the frustration, because you're going to get frustrated, you're going to be frustrated. The author was frustrated all these years, you know, the heaviness that he had to bear as the provider for the family, believing, why, God, why isn't this working? I know that this is my calling, but God, why isn't anything adding up? Nothing's making sense. And I'm so frustrated. And only just 5 years ago, this is when the author realized those four truths, those four principles that are so important for you. And just like I mentioned to Anna and Anna earlier, that I was frustrated myself. It was very frustrating trying to answer that question alone of who am I apart from what I do for others. And I think that that's so important for our for those that are tuning in on live and those that are listening to really I did say on our last episode to write that down, get a paper and a pen and just write who am I, because that's the first truth that we're talking about here. Who am I? Really sit and think about this question because it is frustrating. But once you get past that frustration, that's when things start to turn a little bit more.
Thank you, Kim. Yes, like you said, right now we're focusing on that, right? Just like Jackie Chan, who am I? And we're asking these questions, who am I? And so we're as we ask these questions, we also want to dive into, okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look at who are you? Now we gotta take it back and we gotta see where I came from, who my ancestors are. Sometimes when you're looking at your identity, you're tracing it back to the roots. Let's go back to the start. Let's go back, like I said at the beginning of this, I said to the nothingness. When you first entered the scene, what does that look like? Who was there? And so I really want to take a dive into that. And earlier you mentioned, or both of you mentioned Genesis. Edna, you took us through Genesis earlier, and Kim, you also mentioned in the beginning. And that's something that we've been saying that phrase throughout this is in the beginning. And so let's do that. Let's go to the beginning. Let's see what happened, who was there. And so in the beginning, if for even our listeners, I want to take you back to Genesis 1 and 2. Okay, so let's really go to the beginning here. So thank you, Enner, for pulling that up here. Genesis 1 and 2. And in Genesis 1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it takes us to the creation story, everything that He's created. Okay, so the earth was without form and void. Darkness was on the face of the deep. The Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. God has always been, He always is, and He always will be. And then it says, then God said, let there be light. And so here we have light. God says the light was good. God divided the light from the darkness. Now we have night and day. We have evening and morning. And God says, let there be a firmament in the midst of the water. So now there's separation between water and land. And so we see all of this here, even to um the trees and the animals, the seas, and all of these things that God creates, and He's calling it good. The grass, the herbs, all of that. And then we come to, sorry, let me go to it now. We come to verse 26, and as we walk through the creation story, we come to verse 26. And then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. And Kim, I think that you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about us being created in God's image, that there we see a picture of identity. So here, right at the beginning, guys, you don't have right the first page. The first page, it starts out there and it starts with identity. And God says, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the cattle, over the earth, over everything that creeps on the earth. And so here we see the identity come into play. We see that straight out of creation, and how beautiful that is to know that, when we were telling you guys in the beginning that this is the starting point, it really is the starting point, because it tells us here in Genesis exactly where that begins. So I just wanted to take us there through the creation and just show that that identity was established before everything else.
Yeah, exactly, Anna. Just like you mentioned, thank you for sharing that. How the identity is established before anything else, everything else. It takes me back to Jeremiah and about the potter's hands. And that there's a moment in Jeremiah's story where he goes to the potter's house and he's there to simply just observe the process of what the potter is doing, shaping the clay on the wheel, applying the pressure. And as he's watching the potter form this, the clay, something unexpected happens. The clay just collapses, and Jeremiah is watching him, but it's not because the potter is careless that it collapses or that the clay is worthless, but because the shaping is still underway. And I just love that so much because, as I remember watching videos of just like the potter, potters that build their clay, and a lot of times what they're building with the clay, it will collapse or it'll have a dent and then they have to start all over again, but that's all part of the process, and that's very important. The potter doesn't discard the clay here with Jeremiah. He doesn't step away from the wheel. He doesn't say, oh, this material sucks, get me a different clay, this one didn't have what I needed to have in it. But instead he gathers that same clay and he starts beginning again, reshaping it fit for its purpose. And I loved how it talks about that in Jeremiah, and Jeremiah just observing the potter, because this image right here really reframes it. You can really take it and understand your life, that we are the clay. And a lot of the times there's things in our life or moments where we feel like we've fallen. We feel like, oh, you know what, everything, my life is falling apart. God, what is there? There can't be more than this. And but that's the part that's so beautiful about the stories, because on this part, it's taking that, interpreting the collapse not as a loss, because a lot of the times that's what we take when we go through all these things, all these hardships, and we fall down and go through these seasons of depression and sadness and angerness or bitterness. And a lot of the times we take it like, okay, now I'm back at the starting point, all these things that I've done, now I feel like I've, like, what have I done? Because here I am back at the starting point. But that's what I love so much about this, that collapse does not mean rejection, it often means reshaping. And that's the same thing when you take all those things in your life and your starting point, who am I? Everything starts to make sense. Everything starts shaping into the direction of who you are becoming, because now you know who you are. So now you know your starting point.
Thank you for sharing that, Kim. Just that story about the potter's hand, that's something that I really love. I love hearing that story. I love that illustration and just thinking about the truths in that. And also because, growing up, and I probably shared this before, but growing up in Samoa, my uncle actually taught the pottery class there. So my uncle Sione, he taught the pottery class, and students would come, and he would. When I think about the potter's hand, I think about that image, and I think about him taking just this mold, just this block, of clay, and really working with it, and only through the work of his hands and the pressure he's applying to pull it, to shape it, to mold it, does it finally begin to take form, take shape. And there were many times where I saw him build up a beautiful vase only to then, something happen, and the whole thing collapses. And watching that as a child, realizing how sensitive that is, and how careful he had to be to form it, because any little mistake, any way that if his hand fell a little bit too hard or not hard enough, it would ruin the shape of whatever he was trying to build. So he had to make sure that he was intentional, and he had to make sure that he never removed his eyes. There was never a time where he was looking over here or doing something else, or talking over there. The entire time that he's shaping this clay, he is focused on the thing that he is doing. He is watching it. He is careful. Something beautiful about that story that you just told us about in Jeremiah, the potter's hand, about how in that moment when the clay collapses, in that moment the clay doesn't know what's going on. Like from the perspective of the clay, it's like, hey, I was becoming something beautiful, and all of a sudden I've been crushed. I'm under the weight of your hands. I've been, I'm squished. I'm at my wits end. And the clay doesn't understand what's going on, but the clay also does not know that in that time where they're being reformed, reshaped, that the potter has never stepped away. That in our most vulnerable times is the nearest that the potter has been to us, to watch us, to guide us, to mold us, to make sure that nothing takes away from the integrity of what I'm trying to build, you know? And so just thinking about how that relates in our own lives, in that sometimes whenever we're under pressure and we're underwater, you know, when we're under the things and we don't know, like, hey, hello, who turned off the lights?
Yeah.
I'm in the dark here. I feel all this weight, you know, I'm being pushed up against. And where are you? Like, I don't hear anybody. I don't see anything. Just like the perspective of the clay, they don't understand, but the potter has never stepped away. The potter has been there with them. If anything, the potter's closer than they've ever been before in that moment of vulnerability to make sure that I build you up strong, that nothing can take away or add to. And just thinking about the beauty in that parallel and how it reflects that relationship that we have with Christ, and knowing that, hey, in that moment where you're being crushed and persecuted and you're under pressure and you're under everything is happening at one time, is that's the time that you're the nearest and you're being formed, that his hand has never let go of you. He's that whole time his hand is on you, and he's moving things around and he's molding it to be what it is supposed to be. And so I really love that you shared that illustration, because what a beautiful way to just share that and make that very clear to understand. And I love hearing about that. Every time I hear about that, I just think about Uncle Sione, and I think about seeing it with my own eyes and understanding that, it's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Anna. And I just wanted to read here in the comments in our live chat. Well Adventures said, "Yep, like the fork story," which I know the
I
little
thought about that
champs,
a couple times.
they went over that yesterday at our character development class. I wasn't there because me and Anna actually had our own class that day, but I know that they went over the fork who tried to be the spoon, which is actually also one of our little champs book that is in the library under our foundation on Amazon, so you could get it on there as well. But the fork who tried to be a spoon, and the fork, is in a drawer full of spoons, and he's the only fork, and it's the spoons time. They're eating cereal, so the fork comes and tries to eat the cereal, and it can get some of it, but not all of it. And now the spoons are being used for soup and whatever else, and the fork is stuck because the fork's like, well, I can't do that. I'm trying to be, I want to be with you guys. I want to be just like you, just like the spoon, and do all these things. But, so the fork has this hard time because the fork is trying to know the identity. Like, why am I here? What is my purpose as a fork? Okay. And as the story goes, it's spaghetti night. And now the spoons are having a hard time trying to get the spaghetti, but here comes the fork, can easily pick up the spaghetti, and now the fork knows its purpose. And it's just, teaching our little champs that every single one of us has a purpose that is already created and designed inside of us, just like we mentioned earlier in our episode, that deep yearning that you have, because everyone has that deep yearning of like, there's got to be more, there's something else. And I just love that so much, how you guys went over that story yesterday, the fork who tried to be a spoon. It's such a beautiful way to depict identity and purpose and teaching little kids starting at a young age.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Well Adventures, for sharing that about the fork story. And I love that as you join the conversation, that there are things that you're able to bring to the conversation. That's exactly what this is meant to do. That's the purpose of this. So thank you for chiming in throughout our conversation here. And even though with those that aren't live with us right now, we can still have this conversation. Like, thank goodness for things like this, virtual, for YouTube and Facebook, and being able to go live and talk together with communities across the world. And you don't have to be here in Hearst, Texas at Dos Amores right now, that we can have this conversation right now live. So thank you so much to everybody who continues to pour into what we're doing here and joining us in this conversation. That's exactly what this is about. But taking it back to creation and talking about the creation story, right in the beginning, we see identity come into the picture. And then we see that, we were created in the image of God, that we're described as bearing the image of our maker. And a way that we see that today is through our children, through our kids. When one of her daughters, Anna, when she does certain things, I'm like, you are just like your mom. That face you just made is just like, I'm looking at your mama all over again. And so in that way, knowing that we were created to reflect our maker, not because of what we're going to accomplish or the things calling hasn't even entered the scene here. When we read that in Genesis, it was all about identity and seeing that was established before we lifted a hand, before we spoke a word, or we fulfilled a task. And so human going back to Genesis, we see that humanity was formed before it was commissioned. So before it was given a calling, that all that identity was preceded all of those things. Preceded labor, even preceded purpose. Identity has always been. Okay, and so something that I really want to emphasize here is that you are not valuable because of what you contribute. You're not valuable because of what you do, because of what you're gonna do, but you contribute because you are valuable. And that's something that we talked about, is that purpose flows from identity. Once identity established, then purpose flows. So you contribute because you are valuable. You started off valuable. Okay. And so something that I also want to talk about, since we're here at creation, is I want to also talk about not only our identity, but even how the intimacy and the way that we were created. And so the verse, I want to go back to scripture and take a look at Psalms 139. And so all of our little champs, they know this verse, Psalms 139. And we'll go from 13 to 17. And that's because I want to make sure that I am giving you guys the text as is, okay? I don't want to add to this with my own words. I want to give you guys the words that carry life, the words that hold power. And so in Psalms, Ender, can you read Psalms 139, 13 to 17, please?
Absolutely. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God! How great is the sum of them!
Yes. And I want to, this verse is so beautiful because here the psalm speaks of a God who's not distant, who's not reactive, but who has been intimately involved in every step of the way, in every part of your creation process of how you came to be, that he was intimately and is intimately involved in all of that, aware of beginnings long before outcomes were even visible. Here it says that we were carefully formed. I want to look at the language that it uses here. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Fearfully, what a beautiful thing to be able to say that. Did you know that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made? Yes, that in the process of my creation, that when I was even being formed, that it was fearfully and wonderfully done. And so I want to take some time here to talk about the fearfully part of the scriptures, because reading this, maybe for your first time or growing up and thinking like, fearfully wonderfully made, what do you mean fearfully made? How can you be fearfully made? And there are a lot of examples that come to my mind here. And I think back to, I don't know if the movie was Dennis the Menace or something. I don't know the movie, guys. These things, I don't know why movies keep popping into my head, but
I was like, another movie.
there's a I think it's because this is the first time that I knew of such a thing called a souffle, because I've never known, I didn't know what a souffle is. And so this is the first time in my life that the word souffle was introduced to me, and that was through this movie. And it was something about, I don't know if Dennis is yelling. Do you guys remember? Am I?
It's like in the kitchen.
Yeah, in
making
the
a
kitchen.
mess.
It's something in the kitchen making a mess, and he's yelling, and the souffle deflates. And it's because, and seeing it later in my adult life and understanding the way a souffle is made, it is down to a science. Okay, baking already is down to a science, and you need to make sure that you have enough baking soda, enough egg, all these things, so that the chemical reaction gives you the quality that you are looking for when it comes to baking. And so the same thing with the souffle, but the souffle is special in the way that even after you have put the ingredients together and you place it in the oven, it has certain conditions that it must have in order for it to complete the process. It's not complete yet. Even in the baking, it's not complete. So you have to have the right temperature. And then also noise or like shutting the oven or opening the oven, all of those things in affected affected. And so the souffle, when it deflated because of, I don't know if he was being too loud or they opened the oven. I don't remember that part of the movie, but I know that something happened that uh took away from the conditions it needed to be a perfect souffle. And in that same way, I think about how careful you must be as a baker. How careful you must be to put all of these ingredients together to make sure that you're not a teaspoon over on something. Make sure that you added enough eggs to make sure that your butter was, room temperature, that it wasn't cold, or I don't know how to make a souffle. I'm just guessing. But that all of these conditions must be met so that the result needed will happen. Even to when it's baking, you must make sure that there's no loud noises, that it's the oven's not being open and closed, open and closed. The process is carefully watched the entire time until that souffle ends up on your plate. It is carefully watched, and in that same way, and that's not at the scale of being fearfully and wonderfully made at all, but in that way I think about the way that we were put together so carefully, so fearfully, just making sure that exactly what Kim needs to become who I'm creating her to be, it has to be exact, down to the science, down to the exact measurement. And so when I think about that and think how intimately God was in the process of our creation, that nothing was by chance, nothing was by happenstance, that it's not, oh, just, and just thinking about how purposeful and intentional he was in our creation. Form you, I knit you together. And I think about my niece who knits, Kim's daughter, Faaki. She knits and she's always knitting purses and beanies, and just thinking about that process that it takes to knit one by one, just knitting us together fearfully and wonderfully. Something we talk about all the time when we're cooking is, I made this with love. What's the secret ingredient? Why is your taco so, it's better than my taco when you make tacos? Because I made it with love. And it's so true. That's such a true thing. And in the same way, when we were being put together, we were made wonderfully. We were made with love. We were made with care and intention. We were made with that on purpose, and not hurried, not careless, not accidental. And I want to make sure that point really gets across, is that however it was that you came to be in this earth, yeah, maybe if you, maybe your parents, maybe it was an accident for them, or maybe it doesn't take away, it doesn't disqualify you from being fearfully and wonderfully made, with intention, with on purpose, and taking the time to put you together, to knit you together. Not once was it an accident. And just knowing that, and just being so uh, assured in that truth, is that, you know what? Yeah, my identity was formed in the beginning at creation. Not just that, but it was made so intentionally. It was made on purpose. And so I love that.
The thing about mentioning the souffle is that anytime someone says that, you already know, oh, that person can cook.
And that person took time.
Because no one out here is saying that.
Okay.
Not enough
We're not
people are
cooking
saying that.
souffles.
You know that if you are to receive a souffle, that it's
Right.
good quality.
Yeah.
That's the things I was thinking about as you were speaking.
Mhm.
But also, just going back into Jeremiah, um, one of the things that I want to bring back, you said in the very beginning,
Yes.
I want to bring it right back, is that, especially with this book, the title alone, Formed Underwater,
Yes.
is that as we're talking about the potter and his hands, and having to be very specific about the pressure, and then as a clay feeling all that pressure, that's not punishment. And I think sometimes we feel that that could be punishment. And so I love that the author, for Jeremiah 18, he discovered something in this in that story that he never that he lived through but finally understood, was that being ruined on the wheel, because as Kim was explaining it, I was like, oh my gosh, he has to go back again, go back again.
Yeah.
I just think about all the mistakes that I've made. I just think
Yeah.
about all the misunderstanding and the reordering, and God having to, hey, and this way, come this way, follow me this way, having to lean on his every voice
Mhm.
to be who and where I am today. He discovered that, yeah, being ruined on the wheel is not the end of the story.
Yeah.
And what he once labeled as delay was actually for design, for purpose.
Yes.
And then what he experienced as stillness, I don't know about you guys, but the hardest thing for me was being still.
Yeah.
One of the seasons, literally, long story short, being what felt like about to be homeless, having to stay in a hotel for 2 months, not understanding what was going to happen due the year of all years of COVID. I had to do nothing. I remember praying, and I literally remember God just kept saying, "Be still and know I am God. Just be still." And so, learning how to be still was a season of understanding that being still also can be obedience. Because I'm a person who wants to help. That is my love language, and I also like to figure things out. Okay, but I had to learn how to be still. So, being still was is not an inactivity, but a focused attention. I really learned in that season how to be very intimate with God. Because when you're being still, you have you ever been still over your baby? Your baby can't move.
Yeah.
A newborn cannot move, but you're looking at every freckle.
Yes.
You're like, this might be my dimple. No, no, no. But like, but you're looking at the way that they open their eyes. You're looking at the way that you're just so intrigued with what creation is in your arms, right? Um, Okay, but what felt like loss of momentum was the removal of fragile structures that could not sustain what was coming next, which is such a big one too. The potter does not measure progress by speed. He's not rushing, maybe in little parts, but he's not rushing. It's not about getting there fast. And I love that the author talks about that even in the story. This is not someone who came. Who's at the final destination? He's speaking, as Anna likes to say, in the journey of becoming. He measures by readiness, and takes a lot of integrity. And integrity takes time. When you finally get at that starting point, and like we were mentioning, as a potter is making, as he's creating, and you're thinking about all the things, you're able to go back and revise all the things that God has done. Like, as the older I'm becoming, my prayer has been changing. I say a lot, Lord, thank you so much for my trials, because it's made me who I am today. But when eternity takes time, this is where rest begins to take a deeper form. And not rest from your efforts, but rest from fear. And that's a huge one for me. I was like, my siblings can tell you, every time they talk about me as a childhood, my nickname, I'm sure there's one in every family, but I was a crybaby. I was, they're like, anyways, I should go into that one. Let me, I was a crybaby. I was always in fear. And if you read my book, I talk a little bit about where the fear was created and how that almost felt like it was crippling me from so many years. So at that starting point of knowing who you are, you do kind of feel that coming down, like God is taking that fearness from you. But rest from the need to prove, rest from, like I said earlier, the mistaking the pressure as punishment. And I love that when you know who you are in the hands of the maker, you can remain still on the wheel even when the pressure increases. And I love that he mentions well, in that we learned that you are not being destroyed, we are all being reshaped.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah, and that's so very true, Enner. Thank you for sharing that, and it just goes back because you know your identity.
Mhm.
See, here on our next part in the book, the author writes that identity is not your income, identity is not your education, identity is not your role in the church, identity is not your past mistakes, identity is not your current limitations. And I think that that's so important because a lot of us that we've just talked over and over, reiterating the same thing because we, growing up, we don't think of that. Our identity comes from these things, from our income, our education, what part we have in the church, our job title, our position. But that's why, just like Anna had mentioned, which I'm just gonna, the verse that Anna mentioned is that when identity is unclear, you chase positions and titles, but when identity is clear, you chase impact. And that's why it's so important, like you said, Anna, once you became and you knew your identity, it just felt like those things were, falling off your shoulders and everything. You can see the way, just like the potter, whenever the clay collapsed, now everything's starting to make sense. Everything like, okay, God, now I know who you created me to be. I know who I am, and now I can start going towards becoming like you mentioned.
Thank you, Kim, for taking us to that next part of the chapter. Even though I wasn't ready to go there, but I'm just kidding. I wanted to talk about something that you shared, which I thought was so beautiful because, especially as mothers, that's something that every mother can identify with. And you were talking about being still, and you were talking about, have you ever held a baby in your arms? And that's exactly it. I mean, I never thought of that example before, but just thinking about that, whenever
Sorry, I was gonna say I was gonna touch on that, but then I was gonna touch on that, but then I forgot. But good, Anna's doing it now.
okay, because sometimes when I'm talking, someone else is talking. And I was like, we're talking about being still. Right. Did you hear the be still part? Okay. So, but just kidding. Again, of course.
I know.
But talking
We're
about
sisters.
but just thinking about that, when you're holding a baby and you're so still, it's not you're holding that baby still and you are looking at every single part of that baby's face, their hair, their fingers, their eyelashes, their lips. You're smiling, you're looking at them and, oh, I think that
Sorry.
like, oh, I think that their ears, like they have ears just like me, or their eyes just like me, or whatever it is that you're looking at and just admiring and holding that baby and just seeing this baby in your arms and just thinking about that being still, in that moment, and just thinking about how, in the same way, God, when we are going through seasons like that, and how it must be, and knowing that, yeah, even in those moments of stillness, that God's holding us in his arms, like, or that's just the way that it came to me whenever you were talking, like him holding us in that time, in that moment where we're having to be still and looking at us and knowing, like, hey, I created you. I need you to relax. You are always right. This is your identity. It's not about what you do. It's not, and this identity that you have was created at the beginning, not constructed, not something that was put together with pieces and bits and from here and there, but created. That I created you. And then we learned also through Psalms, so intentionally. I created you so intentionally. And in scripture we see even God says, I know the number of the hair on your head. Okay, like I know you. I made you on purpose, not an accident. I made you. You were fearfully and wonderfully made. And just thinking about, like you said, being on the wheel. That sometimes when we're left on the wheel, and or we're having to be formed all over again. That, like you said, sometimes people might see that as punishment, but it's necessary. What? Because being under pressure, being underwater, and maybe perceiving that as punishment, but not knowing the necessary steps that God is taking to bring you to where you are,
It's like the
who you've always
growing.
been, right? To becoming who you are. And so something that I also want to add to that is also how we were created, because we talked about the creation story, but I also want to talk about foundation a little bit. And this is something that is just so, it gives me so much confidence when I read this. And I just want to bring Ephesians chapter 1, okay? Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 to 6. And we talked about how God created us, how that identity was established. We talked about how we were created and knit together in our mother's womb so fearfully and so wonderfully. So now I want to talk to you guys about Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 to 6. Um, but just focusing on verse 4 here, okay? So verse 4 says, just as he chose us in him, that goes back to being created in his image, how he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love. But I want to focus on that, just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, before this world even was put together, before all of that, before this podcast came to be, before the foundation, before the scholars, before all of these other things, before you had children, before you were a mom, a wife, before the foundation of the world, he already chose us in him. And that right there, if that doesn't tell you your identity, like you've been that girl, the saying, like, I've been that girl, always is, always will be that girl. Yeah, you really have been. You really have been. And it tells us in scripture that you have been that girl before the foundation of the world. Yeah, and I love that so much. So I just wanted to share that because, these are the truths from here. We begin to see that identity begin to shape and come into focus more, or I hope it does for you as it does for me, through these scriptures.
We're going to continue on in our book. If you guys are following along with us, it is on page 18 at the very bottom.
Can you?
The
I'm so sorry. Can you read that again about
Oh, yes,
identity?
yes. It says identity is not your income, it is not your education. Identity is not your role in the church, your past mistakes, your current limitations. Identity is the answer to a simpler, deeper question. Who am I, even if everything else is taken away?
Mhm.
Because this part right here is when you're left with nothing, no job title, position, labeled task, do you know who you are? By then, do you know who you are? Or do these things tell you who you are?
Mhm.
Because reading this right here, it just keeps reiterating and telling us that identity must be clear. And then you work backwards. Once you know who you are, and then that's your starting place. Because now you know this is who I am and what I'm going to become. Now I can start backwards. Here's my starting point and work towards those things
Mhm.
because you know the end goal. And and that's something I want our questions. That's something that I want our listeners to really take in, to really think, to also write this down is who am I even if everything else is taken away?
And that kind of goes right back into the scripture you just read.
Mhm.
I don't have anything else to add to it, but I was just thinking about just like these other things that you listed, and I listed all the things that identity is not me. It's identity is not my friends. It's not my failures. It's not the abuse. It's not my performances, right? But like Anna was saying, like as you were saying, Kim, identity is an answer to a simpler question, a deeper question. Who am I? Even if everything else is taken away. And I thought about that, going right back into the scripture Anna had just read,
Yeah.
just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world.
Mhm.
Here, like all the things Anna had said earlier, none of these things were even within an existence of having an income. That wasn't even in the foundation
Yeah.
when God
Right.
created us. Education, the role in the church, the past mistakes, the current
Mhm.
limitations, as you were saying, it's going right back to the main, keeping the main thing, the main thing as identity has always been before the foundation of the
Yeah.
world.
Right.
Like going right back into before you were born, I knew you. It just gives a confirmation that we this all these things does not identify who I am. Like
Right.
this gives great comfort and
Yes.
praise.
Yes.
Like the scripture say, I praise you because I'm
Yeah.
fearfully and wonderfully made.
Mhm.
That is where our identity
Yes.
comes from.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Eder. And like you said, this just gives us great comfort. And I hope it does the same thing for our listeners too. That I hope that as you walk through this book and even, going back into scripture, some of the scriptures that we've read for today, that gives you great comfort. That gives you confidence. That gives you the assurance that maybe you started this out asking yourself, well, who am I? Because that's a question that you ask. It's not a question that's only when you're an adolescent, when you're a kid, when you're starting out in the world, when you're a teenager, even in our age right now, like me in my mid 30s, even people older than me and walking through life, even people walking at the end of their life. This is something that everybody is faced with. And this is something that you must know for yourself. Who am I? Who am I? Just like Jackie Chan told us in that movie, Who Am I? It's it's the starting point. And until you understand that, you are going to be drifting, you're going to be wandering, there's going to be a lot of disappointments because you, like we said at the beginning of these episodes, because you're disoriented, you don't even know where you are because you don't know who you are. So thank you for sharing that. And another thing that I wanted to point out too, when Kim was saying about these things that your identity is not, and Ender added to that, saying it's not your friends, it's not your performance, it's not your abuse, it's not what you went through, it's not your income, your education, it's not even your role in the church, it's not your title at work, it's not your past mistakes, it's not your current limitations, it's not the amount in your bank account. Identity is none of those things. One thing that I also want to point out is that all of these things are variables. All of these things are ever changing. All of these things are different from day to day, from year to year, from month to month, that all of these things change. And one thing that I want you to understand is that your identity does not change. Your identity doesn't change when your bank account does. Your identity doesn't change when your title does. Your identity doesn't change when you pass the test. Your identity doesn't change with your how much education you have or lack of. Your identity doesn't change because of what you did in the past or the mistakes that you made or what you're doing right now. Your identity remains. And something that is so real to me is just thinking that, you know, you whatever you do, like these variables, you cannot add or take away from your identity. It was never yours to give in the first place. That's not your business. So last time we talked about how, when we're thinking about, oh, what is our purpose, and thinking about, but how am I gonna, but how am I? That's not your business. And your identity is also, that is your business. No, your identity, but
How to
giving
get there.
yourself,
Yeah.
assigning it, it was never yours. You came into this world with that identity, and all of these variables do not define who you are. Okay, and so before we turn the page here, we're going to ask that question again. Identity is the answer to a simpler question. And something that I found out about life is that the simple things really are sometimes the most complicated. And sometimes it's complicated because we overcomplicate it, but it really is simple. And that question is, who am I, even if everything else is taken away, if everything else is stripped away? And what are you left with? Who is that person? Who am I? So here we are moving into our next paragraph here. And for those of you who've been following along the whole time, thank you so much, because I know you guys saw us flip the page only one time. The whole conversation was just that. Okay, and so we're coming here to our last couple paragraphs here, and the author continues to share his discovery with us. And the author says, when I finally slowed down enough to ask that question honestly, something shifted. I stopped measuring myself by where I should have been and started grounding myself in who I already was. I love that so much. I I something shifted and I stopped measuring. I'm repeating it on purpose.
You lost your place.
My favorite thing is doing this with my little sister. Emphasis on the little. Just kidding. Okay, so but the author says, when I finally slowed down enough to ask that question honestly, something shifted. So here we see a turning point. Here we see an epiphany. Here we see a discovery. Here we see alignment, and we see something shifted. I stopped measuring myself by where I should have been, and I started grounding myself in who I already was. I realized that my worth had never been on hold. Had never been on hold. My identity had never been delayed. Only my understanding of it had been incomplete. Yeah.
And just that last sentence right there, Anna, like you mentioned, my identity had never been delayed, only my understanding of it had been incomplete. And that just takes me back to to that verse of my people perish for their lack of knowledge. And here, the author's talking about, because his understanding is not what is understanding. Like, it's not what he always thought it was. It's been incomplete. Right here it talks about, because now just reading this and going over it, and that's why we've started the things that we are doing now, trying to bring these truths to you, and then these knowledge, because now when you know these things, now your understanding is starting to form and starting to make sense, starting to be complete. And I made a note here on this part that we just read, because I said, because now you feel empowered to say no to the things that don't align or serve you. Touching back on what you said, Enner, whenever you had that, driving back home and frustrated, like, who am I, and looking at all the things that you're doing, but none of these things align with who God created you to be. So finally, when we get to the understanding and it starts to be complete, then it's easier for us to say no to those things that don't serve or align according to who we are.
Thank you for sharing that, Kim. Yes. I also love how the author talks about in this portion how he says that my identity was never delayed. Once he came to that realization, it was you just didn't know who you are, but you were already that person. Your understanding was delayed. The way that however you lived your life, and and the thing that we see here before the author had come to this realization in the pages before this, we see a constant effort being made here, trying to, you feel like you're trying to pass the test. Last week we talked about, you feel like you're running in a race but you don't know where the finish line is. Every time you come closer, the finish line changes, the directions, you don't even know the direction that you're going in, because identity was never first realized, that you didn't, something that was already established within you, but you were making your own, using your own efforts to try to figure that out. And the author says here, it was never delayed. It was never delayed. It had been all along. And so here the author says that I stopped measuring myself by where I should have been. Man, I should have went to seminary. I should have already been here. I should have already had this job. I should have already had a home. I should have already been in this place. I should have already been successful. All of that stopped. And you know what we call that? We call that noise. We call that noise. Anything other than what I'm supposed to be doing, who I am, all of that is just noise, distractions. And so the author says, I stopped measuring myself and I started grounding myself in who I already was. And that's what we always talk about on here, in becoming. Becoming. I'm already this person. And the author starts to ground themselves here. And I'm so thankful that we got to this page. It was looking a little scary the first couple pages, but just seeing that, the author now seeing this is not a journey to maintain. I don't have to maintain the status. I don't have to maintain anything. This is not a journey for me to maintain, but this is a journey that I was always invited to walk. This has always been my journey. This was always predestined to be my journey, that I was invited to walk this path all along. Yeah.
As you're reading it in my mind, I'm like, finally, we've
Yeah.
made it
No, seriously.
to a shifting point in the
Right.
author's life.
Right.
Because just for those who has joined us, or if you're diving in wherever you are, and if you missed the introduction part, it was pretty sad, but so honest and so real. It was, but just to give you a perspective of this perspective of what he has just now discovered in the beginning of the introduction. He said that the goals I once held close were drifting farther from my reach. I began to accept reluctantly and painfully that I might never become who I thought I was meant to be. And then he said, I still believed in God, but I no longer expected him to intervene. And then he said, I saw no light, no glimpse of hope, no silver lining. Life felt like a downhill spiral. I no longer had the strength to resist. From just going from there to seeing someone now, like he said, something shifted. And then he's like, I stopped measuring myself by where I should have been and started grounding myself in who I already was. That's such a big, like he said, a shifting moment. That's such a moment, a aha moment that he had. That just makes me glad and cannot wait to anticipate what comes after this part of him discovering who he is, his identity.
Thank you for bringing those things back up, Ender, because I think that that's very important for us to go back and remember that really huge disappointing moment in the author's life, in that in the kind of like quietly giving up. We saw that, and how encouraging it is that it didn't end there, that we've made it to this page where the author finally began to understood these truths. And that's the beginning, right? Is beginning to understand these truths and to know, and we know that identity is the starting point. So with that being said, there is many more pages left in this book. Okay, so we were thinking, like, what next? We're still going through it here. We're not done yet. But that's the beginning of the journey. And so the last sentence of this portion that we're on says, once identity is clarified, something powerful happens. Life stops being a performance and becomes a journey. And that's
That's a good ending.
yes, exactly. And that's exactly what we were saying earlier, is that it becomes the journey not for you to maintain, but a journey that you are always invited to walk on, which is your journey. And so as we walk through this together, we've made it, guys, through, we didn't make it through chapter 1, but we made it through that portion of coming to understanding, the beginning, to understand our the identity that was there from creation, that was there before the foundation of the world, that identity was already formed. and even the way that we were formed, and the intimate process that was taken when we were being knit together, that all of this has intention written all over it from the beginning, from before you even came to be, before you even picked up a pencil, picked up a hammer, picked up a keyboard, whatever it is, before you do, right? And so I love that we got to talk about that today, and to really set that tone as we move forward in these pages to come. Let's get that one thing understood, okay? And so thank you to everybody that's been joining along in this conversation. Thank you to you ladies for coming and sharing, being open to it, and to everybody who's been sharing. Gina Schaff, we see here, you were sharing how you love the scriptures that we were talking about. I know that's my favorite scripture as well, talking about Psalms 139. Just thank you to everybody who's with us right now, those who join us later, and even those who are in here with us currently. Just thank you so much for walking on this journey together. We're so excited to do this. We're continuing off of page 19. So if you want to go and purchase the book on Amazon, we have it there. And again, it's called Formed Underwater. And the proceeds of this book go towards the Kasitati Foundation. And so you can join along with us and pick back up on page 19. Kim, do you have something to say? Because
Yes.
Yes, just like Anna mentioned, you can get the book on Amazon, and you still have time because next week on our episode, we will be having a panel full of women, and we'll be diving into that. So you still have about, what does that give them? Like 2 weeks almost to get your book so you can join along with us.
yes. Thank you for mentioning that, Kim. But yes, you can join us. Get the book on Amazon. The proceeds go to the Castati Foundation. We really want to thank, especially our sponsors. Thank you to Dos Amores for allowing us to have a home here for our foundation and our little champs. We love meeting here. And they also have events that they include the community in. I know that they have a Bloom and Glow pop up coming up in the spring. And this whole episode, right? Kim is just talking the whole time. But thank you so much, Kim, for reminding me of that. They have so many community events that they have here at Dos Amores. We love being here. Thank you so much for sponsoring us. And also, thank you so much to Community Bank of Texas and I'm sorry, Commercial Bank of Texas. And every time I think of them, I think of community because that's exactly what they plant themselves here to do. Shout out to Dario and Crystal over there, Commercial Bank of Texas, and everything that they've done to support all that we are doing. So we really want to thank them too. And guys, we're gonna pick back up as soon as we get back here on page 19. And this part of the story, it's a personal part of our story. And so we're going to be sharing this out loud with everybody. And it's going into something called the pipeline years. And I really want you guys to come back and see why it's called the pipeline years. Why is that such a formidable part of our journey? Why is that such a core memory in our life? And I think it's going to be a beautiful conversation, as it always is. So thank you, ladies, for being here. Thank you for being here. We can't wait to do this again next week. And we'll catch you guys on another episode of What Anna Said podcast. Bye. Honestly, thank you to everybody who's joining us. Kim is going to turn off the live now, but thank you guys for tuning in.
Bye.